he's put back in. Can you imagine? You get off and you spend probably $1 million on Johnny Cochran and F. Lee Bailey and Mr. Kardashian, and then you go break in and steal your stuff back and go to jail for a while. And I was going to say something about but that was in the civil lawsuit. He had the right to a jury trial in that civil lawsuit. It was a significant civil lawsuit. He lost it on that one. The jury decides the facts. I got to say something about this. When you go to court, the judge will tell you, you decide the facts. Did he pull the trigger or not? But I will decide the law, he'll tell you. He'll say, I will tell you that if this, and this happen, then you must find him guilty. That is not true. Now, just go back through the history of juries. The jury has the right to judge the law as well as the facts. The judge, it is his job to tell you what the law is, but you have the right as a sovereign, you have the right as a member of a jury to judge whether or not you want to apply that law to that person. If you think, I'll give you an example that I think I shouldn't have found guilty of, but I was pulling out of the parking lot at TJC, and I didn't have my seatbelt. So as I'm curving onto the street, I reached over and pulled on my seatbelt. Then I got to the stop sign. The motorcycle officer said, I got you for driving without a seatbelt. I said, I didn't have it on for like 20 feet on the street. Yeah, well, I don't make the law and so on. So that's the only time in my life I decided I'm going to fight it for the principle of the thing. And you never win when you fight for the principle of the law. But the point is that, and I tried to go for jury nullification. And on voir dire, I said to the people, if you felt like a law that is legitimately the law, but do you feel like there could ever be circumstances where it shouldn't be applied to someone? You hear of cases where someone's found guilty, but then they get a 1-cent fine or a $1 fine by the jury, right? Because they didn't.
They still have that guilty record.
The judge said, by the way, here in Thailand, he said, you can't do that. No, you can't do jury nullification here. I said, well, can I use some quotes from the Texas Supreme Court on this? No. Can I use it from some U.S. Supreme Court justices, Learned Hand and Oliver Wendell Holmes? No, you can't use that here. You can't do it. And if I was really gutsy and really rich, I'd have said, okay, but I want this on the record because I'm going to appeal this. But I don't have that kind of money and guts, and so I said rats, and they found me guilty, and I paid my $200 or whatever it was. But what I wanted to say is, when you're on a jury, you have the right to say guilty or not guilty, regardless if they did. So you have the right under the Constitution to decide the facts, and no court can ever say that jury was wrong on the facts. They can't retry the facts. But you also have the right to judge what you consider either a morally repugnant law. We used to have, for 58 years, from 1896 to 1954, we had separate but equal laws. And then in 1954, in a unanimous Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court reversed itself and said, we were wrong all these years. Never was separate accommodations for black people, in this case, never was equal. They didn't have equal schools because not as much money was spent, plus there was a social stigma and so on, and they overturned that. We have the right as citizens, as a jury, to just say guilty or not guilty. So when a judge tells you that if you find this, this, and this on the facts, then you must find them guilty or you must find them not guilty, don't you listen to them. You just go ahead but don't tell him, you know what you're going to do, and throw you off the jury, of course.
Well, talk to us about juries that aren't unanimous and how that plays in.
Well, there's sometimes it has to be unanimous. It depends on, in some cases you have to have you have to have a unanimous jury, and so if you have one person out of 12 or one out of 6, it's a hung jury, and so
then they retry them and get a different jury.
They may retry them. They may retry them, or the government may decide not to retry them.
Because I sat on a jury of, I won't say the whole situation, but it would have involved the man being sent back to Mexico. And I was the only one who said, people, he's guilty. and they just threw it out. And I thought, one person?
Well, all you got to do is
and everybody
go through the legal process in America, and you think, oh gosh, we're sunk. There's no hope. It's the worst legal system in the world, except for every other legal system in the world. That's the problem. We're in an imperfect world. We're not going to have total justice and so on until till all men are angels, and then we won't need government, right? Like
but there are places, and I can't remember where I read it, and it may have even been Utah, where they are taking away the right to a jury because of the cost, and the people voted for it. And I
Yeah.
said, is that
Well,
stupid?
well, you can't do that in criminal. Well, you can do it on a very minor criminal, like infractions, a parking ticket and so on. But on criminal, generally speaking, you have the right to a jury trial, period, on criminal. On civil, the spirit of the Seventh Amendment is that you have the right to a jury on a jury trial if you want it on civil matters, if it's significant. That's why they had the $20 clause in there now. And so some people are arguing now, at least this is one argument I'm aware of, saying, if it's not significant, it's not worth the expense and the time to have a jury trial. But that's a real subjective judgment is all I can say,
Well, one of
Rudy.
the things I've seen in the criminal justice side is they tend to offer you what they would sell as a very sweet, well, if you go ahead and accept your, no contendere, or, go ahead and say you're guilty, we'll give you this small penalty. But if you make it go to trial, we're gonna, throw you away and lock up the key, or lock you up and throw away the key.
Persuasion.
Yeah, so-
A last quick comment on this jury trying by the facts and the law and so on. I do recommend the Fully Informed Jury Association. I think it's a very constitutionally solid outfit that does a real good job of articulating the rights of jurors in America and the constitutional history and so on. And if you want to be a good juror, Google FIJA, F-I-J-A, Fully Informed Jury Association, and read some of their materials. It's excellent. No excessive bails or fines, no cruel and unusual. Okay, I went to the Ninth Amendment. Let's go to the Ninth Amendment here. We say the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights, and they're all super important. But these 25 or so God-given unalienable rights that are in the Bill of Rights are in amendments 1 through 8. In the Ninth Amendment, it's what I call the including but not limited to clause, like you'd have in a contract or something. It says, just because we just listed a whole bunch of unalienable rights up here doesn't mean there's not more of them. Let's read that. Just so you've read it at one time. This Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights, in the first 8 amendments there, shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, including but not limited to. There may be more, and as a matter of fact, the Supreme Court has found some more fundamental rights. They found, I think correctly, found the right of privacy. That's what the Fourth Amendment's all about. And without getting into other ones, which would be a real political argument, just stay away from it. The 10th Amendment is so important. It's not it's not a listing of these, but again, the 10th Amendment was an attempt to limit the power of the national government. And so the 10th Amendment said, if it's not given to the national government, by the way, why are we doing this? I can't stand to see all this good food going to waste.
Here, where do you get into this?
It's not for me. I'm just send it around.
Thank you.
Here, let me do that while you teach. I'll do that one.
The 10th Amendment says if it's not in the Constitution, then the national government doesn't have the powers. The Article 1, Section 8 gives maybe about 20 different powers that the national government has, areas of jurisdiction for making law and so on. And then the 10th Amendment says, so Madison said of this, of Article 1, Section 8, national powers, versus the 10th Amendment, everything else that they reserve to themselves, he said that the powers that are given to the national government are few and defined. They're limited, they're specific. Whereas he said the powers that are retained or reserved by the states in the 10th Amendment are numerous and indefinite. They're everything else. And of course, the major problem that we have is that our national government is ignoring that in the Constitution. FDR was I don't want to rag on FDR too much. I think that he may have been what we needed in World War II as a strong military president and so on. But there's no question that there was a quantum leap in ignoring the Constitution, getting the government into all these social areas that were reserved to the states. I don't have a problem personally. I did when I was younger, but I don't now that I'm older, have a problem with welfare. It's just that on a national level, it's not constitutional. It's reserved. If California wants to have a great welfare state, or if Texas wants to have a great welfare state. But if it gets too expensive, then you may want to move somewhere else, But the Founding Fathers saw that as that the states had their own cultures, and they could do as long as they followed the Constitution, stayed within those parameters, then they could do those sorts of things. Problem is our national government has not done that, and they've just taken over everything. All these areas that were clearly reserved to the states because they're not given to the national government in the Constitution. Education, welfare, health care, inheritance law, a lot of criminal law, even though generally we still keep that in the deal. Okay, the purpose of tonight was to review the overall perspective that America is all about the sovereignty of the people, because God made us sovereigns when He made us free, when He gave us unalienable rights, and then to show where some of these unalienable rights are. And we could come up with others, but these are the ones that are the most obvious, that are unarguable, that the Founding Fathers said that we all have the right to by our humanity, by our nature. We inherit them from our parents and from God. And the government doesn't give them to us, can't take it away. Bill?
But then the worst part of this is, with so many people in the United States not even recognizing God, the government takes over the power that they won't recognize.
Yeah.
You don't know you got the right. You don't got the right.
Yeah, I know it.
Remember, Washington said, we the people are the last guardians of the Constitution, because he said the legislature, Congress won't do it. The Constitution gets in their way, it limits them. The president, he won't do it because it gets in his way and limits him. And the U.S. Supreme Court, they're politicians too, and they've got an agenda, and it gets in their way, and they want to be activists in some cases and so on. So we the people are the last guardians of the Constitution. The problem is we have to understand the Constitution. The good news is the Constitution is really, really simple. And once you get used to the language that they spoke, which was a little higher than our language now, and some phrases that we don't use, it's a very simple document. And a lot of it in the Constitution is restating what was said elsewhere, not just here, some of these unalienable rights that show up in the Bill of Rights as well as in the main body of the Constitution, but in other things where it says, for example, that Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress has these lawmaking powers and to make treaties with foreign governments, but then the Article 2 says the President can write treaties. He just has to go to the lawmaking authority, Congress, to get it ratified. And if he doesn't, then it doesn't have any legal binding authority, at least after he's gone. The point being that, again, as we started off here saying, that America is all about the rule of law rather than the rule of man. If we're going to just say, we don't have to obey the law, let's just trust our leaders. There's none of us here, if you get involved in a local political deal, and someone will stand up and say, well, our local leader here, he's been working so hard at this and he knows more than we do, and let's just go along with him. And it's hard. You will find yourself saying, I don't want to look like a kook, and I feel like but we have to start somewhere. I'm proud of these that go down to the Commissioner's Court here, because we have some real concrete cases and controversies, and it takes someone that's blind not to see some of the problems.
Thursday at 10 is a chance to.
In Commissioner's Court and other places. We're losing our Constitution. There's not any question about it. If you were to ask me, are we going to lose it? Is America going to, if I had to bet 50 cents out of my own pocket, I would bet that, yeah, we're probably going to lose it. We're probably going to have a Third World War. We're going to have some reasons to join into a world government and so on. And that if we're ever to get back our Constitution and rule of law, it's going to have to be by bloodshed. On the other hand, it may be that we're able to turn things around. Maybe there could be some catalytic events happen like 9/11. When 9/11 happened, as I mentioned last time, immediately after 9/11, you heard people, I was on the radio at the time, and you heard people talking about God and the Constitution. It was wonderful for about 3 weeks until we, and then it kind of petered out and we forgot about that. But we're apparently headed for bad times, and it may be that will have some catalytic effect where we can reinstitute the rule of law. There are more. This isn't the only kind of a group. These things are happening all over the country in various ways, whether it's Hillsdale College doing their online stuff, and hundreds or thousands. My daughter Audrey, they told me, I got involved in this little Constitution group here, and we were talking one day, and they started talking about Audrey Riddlesbacher, and I said, Audrey, that's my daughter. And they said, well, she used to teach for the Constitution classes at We the People, for the We the People. I didn't know what she was doing. I got too many kids to know what they're all doing, All I'm saying is that these things are going on all over the place, and we're learning these things. And I think that there are a lot more people in America who are coming to understand the Constitution. It's only 12 or so pages, depending on what type font. that you printed out on. Most others, I've never seen, there's not another one, a major nation that has this short and simple of a constitution, and yet this has lasted longer than any of them. It has brought about,
And more meaningful.
as we said, the freedom and prosperity, pardon?
And more meaningful, or more meaningful.
And there's none that is, it has been, they were right. It was a miracle that happened there in Philadelphia. Yes.
The European Union Constitution's over 200 pages long, I hear.
Which one?
European Union Constitution.
Yeah, the Kenya just a couple of years ago passed a new constitution that's 198 pages. Well,
4,543 words.
you get into a lot of details. This is a very simple constitution that has worked very, very well. And the more we look at it, the more I draw the conclusion, I think most of us do, that it was inspired. Not that, as we keep saying, not that any one of those 55 people had it right. The ones who understood the most of it, Madison, the father of the Constitution, the three, and the separation of powers and what do you call them, checks and balances and so on, he didn't get the main thing about you got to have equal states, you got to have state sovereignty, as well, sovereign states as well as a sovereign national government. So that great compromise they came up with, states equal in the Senate and proportional by proportion to the population in the House. None of them. Washington. I mean, who's greater than Washington other than Adam and Eve, or Moses? But George Washington and Ben Franklin and George Mason and George Wythe, someone was talking about him today, and Madison, they all had it wrong. But as all 55 of them, as the smaller states said, we're not confederating. If you leave us out, we'll have no impact if we don't have equality in the Senate. And that happened. The compromises that came about, by the time it came about at the end, they saw it, and they were amazed at the unanimity that there was, that they'd come about with, So there are a lot of people arguing for a constitutional convention now, Article 5 convention, which is, to me, scary. Yes.
Not a
It's not
convention.
a constitutional
They're not
convention,
gonna
it's
do a new
convention of
constitution.
states.
They're gonna amend the one we've got.
Yeah, exactly.
But if we don't follow the
They're
one
gonna
we
amend it out
have, why, what good does it do?
I don't know if you're serious or joking, but it doesn't matter. I'll use the opportunity to say, because Mark Levin, for example, he's a pretty strong constitution, but he's in favor of an Article 5 convention, and he's saying it can be controlled and so on. But it can't be controlled. That's what we learned at the Second Constitutional Convention when we got this one. They were there specifically and not allowed to do anything, at least half the states, but just amend the Articles of Confederation. So they amended them out of existence. If we have an Article 5 convention or a CONCON or a Conference of the States, it's all the same things. Legally bound delegates from the state legislatures that can amend the Constitution.
It's all gotta be ratified too.
It all would have to be ratified, but
But if they could hardly agree back then, you're not gonna get 55.
I can't think of 5 people in Washington D.C. right now that I would want to rewrite my Constitution, much less 55.
That's why they're not gonna be in control of it too.
Well, if you look at the 16th, apparently ratification is not all that important anyway.
Huh?
If you look at the 16th Amendment, apparently ratification is not all
Oh, I
that
know, I've
important
seen
anyway.
that too, yeah.
That's another one we can. But, so the way we've amended the Constitution has worked very, very well. That's the 2 ways you can amend the Constitution. One amendment at a time, that's the safe way, versus a constitutional convention, which could get out of hand. I'm done for today. Next week, we're gonna, any questions or comments that y'all wanna bring up? Yes, Ruth.
You skipped over it on the 8th Amendment, and I just can't help but want to throw out there, because the whole purpose of the Constitution, like you talked about, was to give you a standard to rally the people back to, and when you see it being violated, you may not agree with what the guys did at the Malheur Federal Reserve thing, the boy.
We talked about that before we got here.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
So the fact that those boys are locked up with no bail?
Yes,
Okay, because yeah, you talked about excessive bail and whatnot not being allowed.
absolute violation of the Constitution, no question about it. And I'm afraid they're gonna put Sheriff Mack in. Anybody who went out there, I thought about going myself, and they have said, round up anybody who actually even went out there. I'm wondering who they're gonna actually end up doing. Next week is civil rights, and we talked about civil liberties today. So when we talk about civil liberties, all these things mean the same thing. Inalienable rights, natural rights, inherent rights, civil liberties, basic rights, fundamental rights, freedom. They're God-given inalienable rights, all words for the same thing. But next week we're talking about civil rights, which is basically about discrimination on the basis of race, religion, national origin, sex, and our history here in the United States and how we've overcome some of that, and we're making progress.
Did you
Civil
say
rights is
sexual
a fascinating.
orientation?
Pardon?
Did you say sexual orientation?
Yes.
I did not say, I said sex. But sexual orientation wants to be in there, and as a matter of fact, they are in there now. There's no question they're effectively on the list of inherent characteristics that create suspect classifications and so on. So we'll talk about that next week.
Is there anybody who doesn't have a copy of the books we're talking about?
We want everybody to have a
I sent it.
5,000-year leap.
Two. And then you,
Please, good.
anybody else?
Done, I gotta turn this off. Good job.
Now I want one of those.
You gotta have this. Hey, where did these sandwiches